First bill is House Bill 256. Manufactured mobile homes require certain notice to tax collector when relocated to another county. This bill came over. This is a strike all. This is strike all. Yeah. The strike all before you. The only change that was made is on line 44. It talks, in addition, if a manufactured home or mobile home is relocated from one county to another, then the owner of the manufactured home or mobile home within 21 days, it was 7 days. We felt like that was a little too, not enough time to get this done, but within 21 days after relocation shall provide notice to the tax collector of the county from which the manufactured home or mobile home was relocated. So basically it's up to the homeowner to notify the tax collector. That's the definition or description of the bill. Are there any questions? Tile sufficient to pass strike all as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. That bill will be reported out. Next is House Bill 684. Representative, representing the grocers. I think we talked to Kroll about this, but I'm going to recognize Senator Johnson to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This just simply extends the repeal date for 3 years on the Small Business and Grocer Investment Act. And that's an explanation of the bill.
All right. You heard an explanation, Bill. Senator Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Johnson, can you tell us how actively utilized this program has been and how much money has been spent thus far?
I don't have that data, but I'll get it for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator McDaniel for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see it extends the repealer. I'm trying to understand the Grocer Investment Act. Can you explain that?
My understanding is that it is to encourage businesses to locate grocery stores in what would be food deserts.
That's what I was afraid of. Okay, let's talk about that for a little bit. I know we don't have the numbers as to the success, but as I understand the program, there are places in the state where the free market doesn't support a grocery store. And so the taxpayers of Mississippi are subsidizing that store so as to make it competitive in the marketplace, right?
That would be correct.
What other businesses have we done this to? Do you know? Because I'd like to get a steakhouse in Jones County if possible.
I think there's a whole booklet of tax credits that we offer.
Well, this isn't just a tax credit, is it? Is it a credit or is it a subsidy?
I believe this is actually grants.
It's credits? That's a little better. Grants. Grants. Well, a grant's different than a subsidy. I'm sorry, than a credit. Is it a grant or it's a grant? So that is a subsidy. All right. Okay. Well, I'm going to lose this either way, but I just wanted to be clear that's the program. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Motion is tile sufficient, do pass.
Motion is tile sufficient, do pass. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Next is House Bill 833, Mississippi Motor Vehicle Commission Law. Marty, if you would please come up and give us an explanation of the bill. Hit the green button on there if you don't mind.
We good?
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 833 is really a simple bill as far as what we're trying to accomplish. I represent the Mississippi Automobile Dealers Association. That's 217 car dealerships across the state of Mississippi. What we are trying to do for 50 years, Mr. Chairman, we've had a franchise law in Mississippi. And those franchise law has been a law that kind of regulates what manufacturers and dealers do. Dealers having a license have to have a bona fide contract with a manufacturer. And through that process, they are licensed. They have dealerships that create 17,745 jobs in the state of Mississippi. And what this bill does is a loophole that has been created in the law. And this closes the loophole regarding manufacturers and dealerships licenses. So dealerships would be continue to operate as they operate. There's also, as everybody knows, there's a new model that some electric vehicle companies have employed in Mississippi. It grandfathers one of the electric vehicle companies in that has come into Mississippi. They have a dealership that would be grandfathered in, and it allows the other, really any of the other electric vehicle companies would continue to sell their vehicles online that they do now. And that's basically what the bill does, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions? Senator England for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have a question. I'm not sure if it was directed to you, and I appreciate, Marty, I appreciate you being here and talking with me a lot on this bill. You mentioned that this is there's a loophole that has been around in this 50-year law that I guess has been discovered. And I have a question about that because that deals with the franchise law and the contracting that goes on between the dealers and the manufacturers, I would assume. Do those contracts have franchise provisions in them between the dealer and the manufacturer? In other words, do they contract are they able to contract into their own agreement that they are the franchise owner for a certain area in a certain part in a state?
I think if I'm hearing you ask the question, you're asking about a franchise agreement between a manufacturer and a dealership?
That's correct. Do they have those? Are those in so in other words, do some dealers have a provision in their franchise agreement, say with the dealer in, let's say Ocean Springs, Mississippi with Ford, they are the franchise dealership for Ford in Ocean Springs. Do they have that in their provision that would prevent another individual from going to open up another Ford right down the street to sell the same vehicles? Kind of like, and just to explain further, in D'Iberville, we have a Chick-fil-A, and it's very popular. Everybody think, well, why don't we go open another Chick-fil-A? Well, you can't do that if there's a franchise owner that owns those franchise rights in that area. So do car dealers have the same type of agreement with manufacturers?
Yes, sir. They're in the franchise agreement, and we'll use your home area, Senator England. So Estabrook Ford has a franchise agreement with Ford Motor Company. And within that franchise agreement, it's a bona fide contract. And in that contract, they have to meet certain standards by Ford. They have to have a certain amount of square footage for store space. They have to have so many vehicles in the showroom, all those things. And there are primary service areas or sales areas that manufacturers have with their dealerships. So obviously, these dealerships are making multi-million-dollar investments. They are going in when they break ground, they're buying dirt, they're having to put these facilities in. And when they do that, the manufacturer and the state of Mississippi says, you should be protected for your investment for a certain amount and those franchise agreements have a certain amount of time. But yes, to answer your question, the short answer is yes. Every franchise dealer, not only in Mississippi, but in the country, has a dealer agreement between their manufacturer and the dealership.
Okay, so if, and you mentioned Estabrook Ford and Nissan, which is an excellent dealership down in our area, and I've dealt with them and bought vehicles from them as well. But if say Senator Jason Barrett wanted to move into Moss Point and open a Ford dealership, he would likely run into an issue where he couldn't do that because there's already a franchise owned. Jason, I'm sorry to tell you, there's a franchise already owned by the Estabrooks in that service area. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I think that's great. And I think it's great that our dealers can contract into that to afford them that ability. And I think that franchises in all different areas of manufactured goods, services, food services, things that they have that. So I'm glad to hear that. Another question that I do have, something that I'm just not comfortable with this bill, and you and I have talked about it, and I just want to discuss it with you a little more, is we have new vehicles coming into the market, and they're brand new, EVs, electric vehicles, they're coming into the market, and these manufacturers of these new vehicles have what I would refer to as a different sales model than these other groups like Ford and Toyota that have franchises that come out and work, and their service, their sales model is different. Would you agree? Then what is currently going on with these other, I've heard them referred to as legacy dealers, is that right?
Yes, sir. Their sales model typically involves a consumer going on and ordering their vehicle online and they deliver it to them. And this bill doesn't stop that.
But if we do pass this bill, it would stop those manufacturers from opening a dealership other than the one that's already here. I understand there may be one that's grandfathered in, but it would prevent those dealers from opening a, let's just say electric vehicle, a dealership in Moss Point, Mississippi. They would not be able to do that. They would only have to rely on their online sales. Is that, if we pass this bill, is that correct?
They could hire a dealer like, they could franchise with a dealer just like everybody else does. So it doesn't prevent them from having a franchise dealership.
Okay, so what then does this bill do?
Yeah, okay. Well, like I said, it closes the loophole that was created, which one of the manufacturers, they're the only manufacturer in the state that's able to contract with themselves. Okay. And so nobody else can do that. We've had the law for 50 years and it goes in and closes that loophole. So that's what it does. And then it has that other provision that grandfathers the other manufacturer in. But to your point, Senator England, just yesterday, I was online with one of the electric vehicle companies and I had a chat with them. Be glad to share this with you. And you could do it yourself.
Right.
You can go on and chat with them right now. Can I get a vehicle in Mississippi? I did this. I live in Mississippi. Can I order one of your vehicles and have it delivered to my home? I see, great question. Yes, we can make the delivery as we have workarounds for those situation states that have restrictions. So there's other states that have, restrictions, but there's nothing that prevents any Mississippian from buying the vehicle that they want from whatever manufacturer they want. And you can do it online or you can go into your car dealership. So
even these new manufacturers would be able to open a car dealership in Mississippi if we pass this bill?
they can have service centers.
Okay, but not a service center.
They could have service centers or they could contract with do a franchise dealership like Ford or whatever if they wanted to.
Well, what if we grandfathered in? You mentioned
What if we grandfather?
Right.
There's Tesla Motors came into Mississippi. They filed for a license as a manufacturer and a dealer at the Motor Vehicle Commission. And the commission said, you can't do that. You got to be one or the other. And so Tesla went and created a LLC and created Tesla Mississippi LLC. And where every other dealer has a bona fide contract with their manufacturer, they contracted with Tesla and Tesla LLC. Okay. And they have a dealership in Pearl. So they are grandfathered in. They're here, they have their model, but it's kind of like if you were, you have a law in the state of Mississippi that says the speed limit's 60 and you say, well, I'm going to drive 80 because that's my model. It's like we've had laws here, we have rules here, and it might be different conversation, Mr. Chairman, and Senator England, if we were starting from scratch, but we are, dealing with a system that your Mississippi business owners have relied on that's enabled them to go and create dealerships that are great for your community. They sponsor your ball teams, give cars to school teachers and scholarships and all these things, creates tremendous amount of jobs. And that's what, that's what our dealership model is in Mississippi. And I think it's good for Mississippi. The competition is good. When you have, if you're shopping for whatever from Esterbrook and you think that Esterbrook, you might want to be able to go back into the Esterbrook's and say, I think, I just talked to another Ford dealer and they're saying this is the price for this vehicle. So I'm not trying to pick brands here, but you brought up, that. So I'm using it for purposes of this conversation. So.
Well, let me ask you why you're there.
Those dealers, those dealerships, that's what they do for the state of Mississippi. And we think it's, it's a model that works for the state.
So the opening of the Tesla LLC, that's the loophole that we don't want. So in other words, you don't want Ford LLC to come in and open.
100%.
Okay, well, if a Ford LLC were to say, we're going to come open a Ford dealership in Moss Point, where the Estabrooks do, since we've used them as an example, and I'm not picking on the Estabrooks, they've sponsored ball teams. They're great pillars of our community, and I think that our car dealerships actually act as commercial anchors a lot of times when they move into an area. I really love seeing them do that. But if Ford wanted to open a dealership, would they not be restricted by their franchise agreement from doing so if that's been negotiated in and out?
Not in the context of that. Plus, Ford has a investment in one of the electric vehicle companies. They could take so there's a lot of other things going on.
Right. No, I agree.
For example, if you Google Chinese electric manufacturing companies that have electric vehicles, there's thousands.
Mhm.
There's 3 of them that my research shows are on the New York Stock Exchange. So another company could come in and buy one of the electric vehicle companies and have a road that they went down on that. And we think that's very dangerous for the car dealers. The car dealers couldn't survive. You would lose your car dealerships in the state of Mississippi if they, if their own manufacturer came in and started competing against them directly in whatever fashion. So
what other
that would be a
states have,
problem.
what other states have the legacy dealers moved in and opened their own dealerships and started competing against their dealers?
What other legacy manufacturers?
Yes, where has that occurred? What other states has that occurred where you've had, say, a Ford LLC open up and start competing with their own dealers?
I don't know that it has, but most of the laws in the other states, Mr. Chairman and Senator England, would stop that from happening. So we're trying to have our law status quo from what it is now and repair that loophole. But other states like Alabama couldn't happen. Arkansas couldn't happen. Louisiana.
So they're legislating it from not happening, but it's actually not happening anywhere that we're aware of right now.
It's prohibited by law in most of the states.
In most, do you have that number of how many that is?
I can get it to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do
don't
have
know it off the top of my head.
I obviously have some questions. I appreciate you answering my questions, Marty. I really do. And you've done this previously, and I've talked with some very nice dealers that have been here, and I'm glad that they were here to talk with me about this. But there are just some lingering questions that I have, primarily focused on the idea that the sales model that these legacy dealers use has worked well for them for a long time. And we now have another manufacturer that's entered the market that uses a completely different sales model. And we're being asked to tell them, look, we understand that your sales model is successful and you're doing good things with it, but that's not how we do business in Mississippi. So you can't bring that sales model here. And I may be wrong, but it's just a concern that I have. And it's something that I haven't had answered to my satisfaction. And I can't speak for my colleagues here, but they can maybe ask questions if they have any. But to have these questions addressed and to meet with you more, I would, Mr. Chairman, I would have an amendment at the proper time.
Okay, I'll recognize you at the proper time. Senator McDaniel for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first to you, and this may be the amendment that Senator England's referring to. Is there a reverse repealer in this bill?
In the strike all, yes, there is.
There is one in here. Okay, good deal. That's it. Okay. All right. Thank you. I guess my question, I thought Senator England hit on some very good points, and Marty, you and I have discussed this a little bit, and I appreciate your work on this. It's just somewhat confusing. I guess I want to start at a space and go backwards. I guess if I were to ask you directly, what concern does your clients, what concerns are they trying to address here? Just specifically by passing this bill, what is their primary number one concern?
Yes, so I don't think this is any different than any other licensing situation for the state of Mississippi. Senator McDaniel, for example, if you took realtors, there's many, years of law in place that says you've got to do this to be a realtor, you've got to do this to be a broker. And if somebody came in and said, we have a different model that we're going to use, and we're going to We got a different model, and they did something that created a loophole in the law. You would go in hopefully and try to fix that so everybody's playing by the same set of rules. And so that's what the 217 car dealerships in Mississippi are trying to ask the Mississippi Automobile Dealers Association to represent them and do, is to take care of that. And that's in essence what it is.
Would you say the larger concern is competition from other industry companies that operate differently, or is their primary concern something from within their family? In other words, is the primary concern that Ford, for example, would come in and compete directly with one of its franchise sellers?
That would be it.
Is that the biggest concern?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I guess to Senator England's point, contractually, there should be protections there naturally. But in the event there are not, you're just trying to find a way to get ahead of it statutorily, I suppose. Okay. Mr. Chairman, I guess if reverse repealer is in there, I'll reserve further questions for another time. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Horn for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Marty, isn't the horse already out of the barn? And you guys are trying to put the horse back in?
The loophole is certainly there, Senator Horn, and we're trying to deal with that the best way we know how. We think that this bill does that.
Okay, so we're going to grandfather Tesla in, but any other electronic vehicles that want to come into this market, either via online internet sales or the method by which Tesla used, would be prohibited from doing so. They would have to cut a deal with an established a dealership here in the state. Is that correct?
Well, I think they'd have to follow the law just like everybody else does.
But that would be the effect of the law if we pass this bill, right?
The effect of the law is it wouldn't prohibit them from selling their vehicles online. It wouldn't prevent them from having a service center if they wanted to open one in every county in the state. If they were going to have a storefront, they can display their vehicles. If they're going to have a storefront and sell those vehicles, they would follow the law that every other dealership's followed for the last for the last 50 years.
But they wouldn't be able to do as Tesla did and establish itself as a manufacturer as well as a dealer. Is that correct?
They would not be able to, they or anybody else wouldn't be able to come in and just form an LLC and contract with themselves.
And is there any information available that says that for the consumer, protecting the dealership rights is best for the consumer?
Absolutely. The consumer wins with your dealerships. They have for years. They have competition. There's competition among brands. The different car manufacturers go out and try to create the best vehicle they can and offer that to the consumer to buy. You do that as a consumer, you benefit from that, and you benefit from having multiple dealerships where you can go in and like we talked about with Senator England, you can go in and say that I'm looking for this vehicle and this is the price wherever, and you make that. So the consumer benefits greatly from this model that we have.
And currently Tesla has the only deviation from that model. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And if we pass this bill, you would make sure that Tesla would be the only manufacturer dealer that would have that advantage.
Well, Mr. Chairman, they're already licensed in Mississippi, so this takes care of everybody that's already has a license in Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Senator Horn. Any other questions? Senator Filligane for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Milstead. My question is, I believe it's in lines 211 through 217, if I'm thinking at it correctly where the grandfathering language is for Tesla, for the one dealership they already have in the state? Is that the correct place I'm looking at?
I'm getting there, Mr. Chairman.
No, take your time.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so my question is, I understand you're trying to protect the dealerships, and I appreciate that, and I think you're doing a fantastic job with your presentation. My question is, it appears that if we pass this bill as is, we'd be changing the rules of the road, so to speak, for the Tesla dealership that's already here, because if they had known that we were going to pass a bill like this, they might have decided to open a couple of others in other portions of the state, not just in Pearl. Do you think that would be a reasonable assumption?
I have no idea.
Okay, well, let me ask it a different way then. If, would you consider this changing the law as it relates to the dealership that Tesla has already put into place in the state of Mississippi if this were to pass?
I'm sorry, Senator Filligan. I couldn't understand your question, or I was having the echo in here. I'm having a little trouble hearing.
Oh, that's no problem. I'll be happy to repeat it. So is it your understanding if we pass this bill as it's currently before us, this would change the rules as it relates to the operation that Tesla has already set up in Pearl, Mississippi, moving forward? They would not be able to do that in any other portion of the state of Mississippi.
That's a great question. I don't think it changes the rules at all. I think it,
Then why do we need the bill?
I think it goes because it needs to, we need to have the rules as they've been operating under all these years. So I think it clarifies the law to what it has been that all the dealerships have followed for all these years. So I don't think, I think it gives us status quo of where we've been. I don't think it changes the law at all.
So if it doesn't change the law and Tesla wanted to open up a similar dealership in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, if this law passes, would they be able to do so since the law isn't being changed?
If they contracted with a franchise dealer, they could.
No, I'm saying as they established it in Pearl, Mississippi,
They-
could they do the same in Hattiesburg, Mississippi?
There's a possibility there's satellites that, under the law. So there's some possibilities that they could do that.
Can you walk me through that possibility?
I'm not versed enough on the satellite law, but but I could certainly, I could get with you on that.
Would you be opposed to them if they could find a way in the satellite law to open up a dealership in, say, Hattiesburg or Gulfport or Columbus? Do you have an objection? Does the dealership association have an objection to Tesla using the satellite provisions of said law to open up a dealership in these other locales in the state of Mississippi?
Yes, our position, Mr. Chairman, is to have the law, the loophole closed, and everybody operate under the same set of rules. And so however that would work, then they would follow that law.
So you're not answering my question. My question is, do you have an objection to Tesla setting up a dealership in Hattiesburg the same way that they've set up a dealership in Pearl?
Not if they followed the law. I don't have a problem at all.
So if
We want everybody to be under the same set of rules.
I agree totally. So if I offer an amendment in just a few minutes that would expand the number that Tesla would be able to open in Mississippi from, say, the current one on line 212 to, let's say, no more than 5, you wouldn't oppose that amendment, would you?
Is whatever the legislature passed, Mr. Chairman, if that's what the legislature wanted to do, then, that'd be the commission's job to enforce it.
Would you have an objection based on your presentation of the committee, since you seem to not think that this is changing the law and that they ought to be able to do this under the satellite provisions? Would you have an objection to that being clarified in the bill?
I'd have to go back to the MADA leadership and our board and give you an answer on that.
So you're not prepared to say that you would be okay with them using their satellite provisions, as you just explained, to open a location in Hattiesburg?
Well, there's a satellite provision now, so you wouldn't have to change the law to do that.
And if you and I are in agreement, then me clarifying that intent in this piece of legislation would not be offensive to you or your association.
clarifying the,
Yes, what you just said, that there are provisions that would allow Tesla to set up other dealerships similar to the one in Pearl and other locations in the state of Mississippi. I think that's what you just told me.
yeah, we're firmly believe that this law is what Mississippi needs. We think it's good for Mississippi. We think it accommodates everybody. We think everybody can follow their model. And that's what we're trying to work. That's what we're supporting right now, Mr. Chairman.
But that doesn't answer my question. My question again is if you don't believe that setting up an additional Tesla dealership in Gulfport or Horn Lake or Jackson, even anywhere in the state of Mississippi, because I believe you just said multiple times that you believe there's a way they can do that through the satellite provisions of the law. My question is, would not it make sense to be very clear that that is in fact the case in this particular legislation?
Yeah, again, I'm not going to be able to tell you that the MADA agrees to expand that provision because we haven't discussed it. I don't have the ability just to make those decisions standing at a podium and testifying in front of the committee.
I understand, and I appreciate you answering and trying to answer my question. I guess my concern is that it appears there's some confusion on the part of you or the association that this may already be, in fact, be the case anyway. So my thought is simply to clarify that and make it so that it is very clear to everyone that, you know, you're trying to protect the legacy dealerships to keep Ford or Chevrolet from coming in, or Toyota or whomever, and setting up an electric car dealership that's industry owned and bypasses the local dealerships. And I don't think any of us want that. But you don't seem to have any concern really with Tesla doing what they're doing. So I'm trying to see if there's not a way that we can not throw the baby out with the bathwater and still protect your client's interests at the same time as making sure the state of Mississippi doesn't end up on the last place like we do in so many different scenarios with Tesla and other electric vehicle producers across the country. I think clearly it's the way of the future, and maybe we ought not stand in the way of that if we can figure out a way to not do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the proper time.
All right, thank you, Senator Villian. Senator England, you have a question?
Yes, just a few follow-up questions. I did have a chance to look at, do a little bit of research on my questions I had earlier, Marty, and I just wanted to share these with you. We were talking about states that currently allow for an open model for direct sales, and I understand we're calling it a loophole here, but Mississippi is one of 22 states that currently has an open system for direct sales. Does that sound about right, or do you have any reason to believe that to be incorrect?
When you say direct sales, what do you mean by that? Because there's different meanings for different of direct sales.
Right, for a manufacturer to open up a dealership in a state, there are that's what I'm calling open sales. But look, if I'm using a term of art incorrectly, I'd appreciate you telling me the proper jargon to use. But currently, a manufacturer like Tesla is able to open a Tesla LLC in Mississippi. I'm calling that as an open system where a manufacturer can come in and sell cars directly. That's what I'm calling as an open state. Does that make sense?
Well,
And if it doesn't, you can tell me.
It does, but what you need to understand that to do that, they have to create like they did a LLC to contract with themselves. And there's no other, dealership in the state that gets to do that. So that's where the different set of rules. But when I hear direct sales, I think about someone being able to directly buy a vehicle from whoever they want to buy it from. And I just want to be clear, this law does not stop that.
But so you're referring to online sales. In other words,
I am.
Okay, so if I wanted to buy a Ford online from Ford, could I do that right now?
Yes, sir.
I wouldn't have to go through a dealer?
I think you would have it delivered to I think their model is to deliver it to a dealer.
Okay, that's their sales
And
model.
Yeah, much like the, liquor store law that you did, that, you buy it and it's delivered and it goes through
I think you and I might
Store.
agree that, some of those times we might be limiting some things with these. But as far as liquor is concerned, I'd have to check with Senator Chasenhall on that. But we, right. So let me just get back to my research that I've done here temporarily on a smartphone, which, by the way, is a new model of communication that we allow here in Mississippi, other than going through, if we limited to landlines back to protect our dealers in the communication industry way back when, I wouldn't have been able to do this just now, which is just kind of a statement to make there. But through my research, I've learned there are at least five other states that are currently seeking to open their law from I'm using these terms open and closed. They're opening up their law to allow for manufacturers to come in and deal in their states. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware there are other legislative issues going on in some states.
Are you aware that Mississippi is currently the only state seeking to close this legislative calendar year? We're the only ones seeking to go backwards. And I know you might have a problem with my use of the word backwards, but we're the only ones seeking to prevent that type of model of sales in the country right now. Do you agree with that?
I wouldn't agree with that.
Why wouldn't you agree with it? Do you have a reason?
Well, I talked to the lobbyist and the president of the Georgia Automobile Dealers Association last night, for one.
Okay, so that's going to before their legislators, and they'll be having the same kind of debate, which I hope is as good as ours is going now. And just my final question would be, if we do close this loophole, would we not, in let's say Tennessee or Louisiana, have an open system where manufacturers can go in? Are we not pushing their technology and their dealerships to these other states by telling them they can't come use their sales model in Mississippi? So they'll force them to look at maybe Memphis and New Orleans as opposed to Biloxi or DeSoto County.
I don't think you're stopping anybody from using their sales model, Senator England. I would challenge you this afternoon.
Okay.
Go on a website or call and have a chat conversation and say, I'm from Mississippi. Can I buy your vehicle? And I'm telling you, the answer is going to be yes. You don't affect their model at all. And I think that's very important to understand, for the whole Senate to understand. You're not stopping anybody from buying and using their model. Do it. I challenge you. Go on this afternoon.
I can't afford these vehicles,
Yeah,
to be quite
but
honest with you.
But I can't either.
Right.
But just go on there and ask them, I got a text. I'm glad to share it, but I'd love for you to do it yourself. I did it yesterday. Can I do your vehicle? Can I buy your vehicle? No problem. Can I have it delivered to my house? No problem. Go on and talk to them. They got 800 numbers. They got chats, and you will find that there's nothing that stops their model.
Right.
This doesn't change. And when you adopt this legislation, it's not going to stop their model. What it's going to do, Senator England, is going to preserve the law that we have. It's going to close that loophole. It's going to say to these dealers, there's 217 dealers around the state of Mississippi that provide all these jobs and make a difference in your community that are Mississippi-owned businesses. What it's going to do is going to tell them that your investment that you've made in Mississippi and the jobs you're providing is sound. And that's what you're going to do if you pass this legislation. You're not going to stop anybody from buying an electric vehicle, whatever model they want to have. If they want to drive 80, you can drive 80 unless the law says it's 60. So we're closing a loophole that one of the companies came in and created and contracted with themselves. And that is what we're trying to do. And the dealers need this done. It's the most important legislative issue that MADA has ever worked on. And we've been around 81 years. And the reasons it's important is because they're investing in your communities. They're making cars affordable. You can price them. You can do a lot of things. And that's what we are trying to get done with this legislation.
Thank you, Marty. And I do appreciate your passion on this, and I understand it. I looked back procedurally at the House bill that we're debating now, and I understand there was a committee substitute that was adopted, passed the floor of the House, was held on a motion, and then amendments were made to another bill. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you know what those amendments were? Did they allow for direct sales The first bill, the committee substitute that passed the House, did MADA have an issue with that?
Yes, we did.
What was that issue?
The issue was there was basically tried to create two sets of rules. One for this model and one for this other model. And it didn't work. We're not the only ones interested in this, Senator England. I'm glad you brought this up. And Senator Harkins, I apologize. I know this is taking a lot more time you had allocated for your meeting. I apologize. I do. We're not the only ones interested in this, Senator England. When we started this process of looking at drafting legislation, we have manufacturers in the state, Nissan, Toyota, they're engaged on this. They think there ought to be one set of rules. I don't want to speak for them. They have their own lobbyists. I can tell you the Alliance of Automotive Manufacturers that represents all the car dealers, the 31 manufacturers that our car dealers represent, they are on board on this. They think there ought to be one set of rules. So so it's not just MADA that's interested in this legislation. It's your other companies that have invested in Mississippi. It's the other manufacturers that our dealerships represent, all 31 of them. And that's who's also interested in this. So they want one set of rules for everybody. And that's, so when you start looking at two lanes, they're like, no, sir, that's not going to work. So we look at them as partners with our dealerships. Yes, we franchise with them, but it's just not us. So when you start doing two sets of rules, you bring into a lot of other things into play, and therefore that's the short, long answer of why that doesn't work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'll reserve any other questions. I know we've gone on a long time about this bill, and I appreciate, Marty, I know these are tough questions, but it's a tough issue, I think, for a lot of us. That number one, are wondering why we need the bill, and number two, whether the bill will prevent people from being able to come into Mississippi and compete with the new model that they have. But I think you've done a good job trying to answer those, and I appreciate the discussion that we've had.
Well, to answer that, we do need the bill, and it doesn't prevent anybody from coming into Mississippi.
Thank you, Senator England. Senator Sparks for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does anything in the bill prevent direct sales for manufacturers? Does anything in the bill prevent direct sales?
When you say direct sales, are you talking about from a consumer buying a car from the manufacturer?
That's correct.
Yeah, no, it does not.
Does it prevent service centers?
No, sir, it does not.
So if somebody wanted to put service centers in because they're selling directly to customers in Mississippi, this bill doesn't prevent that.
No, sir.
Okay, so the purpose of this bill is to prevent the cannibalization of existing dealerships of legacy manufacturers. Is that the short version?
Yes, although I would like to not use cannibalization. The manufacturers might not want me to use that word, but
I'll use it. If the manufacturer eats the dealership, that's cannibalization.
Okay, but yes, sir.
So the recourse they would have, other than existing franchise laws, is to duke it out in court with the legacy manufacturer. So the local dealership could go fight in court with Ford, GM, et cetera.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Horn, you have a question?
Marty, I appreciate your dedication to this issue. Number one, why, if the model is so bad, why are we grandfathering Tesla in this? Is it because of a fear of litigation or what?
No, sir, there's no fear of litigation, Senator Horn. Our view on that was they came in, however they came in, and we've discussed that enough. But they're here, they have a dealership, and we didn't think it was right to ask the legislature to come and close that business that they have. So that's the easy answer for that.
Do we hear, or are you aware of whether there are other electronic vehicle manufacturers that are interested in coming into Mississippi at this point?
To have a dealership or to sell vehicles?
To sell vehicles. And
Well,
to sell it using their stated business model.
I don't know. I don't know if any other electric vehicle company would come in, and I don't know if they would put one in, wherever. I have no idea. I do know that this doesn't stop them from selling their vehicles to Mississippians.
Well, for the sake of uniformity, why don't we have everybody conform to the same rules and not do carve-outs?
Well, Mr. Chairman, if the legislature wanted to remove that language that Senator Fillingane was referring to, the lines 111 through whatever, that would be your prerogative.
I thank you, Marty. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on the bill? Before I recognize Senator Fillingane. Senator Fillingane, you're recognized for an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And it's a conceptual amendment, but I'll defer to the legal counsel. I think it would go in replacing subsection C on lines 211 through 219. And my amendment essentially is that for any manufacturer that manufactures and sells only motor vehicles that are plug-in electric vehicles that do not rely on any non-electric source of power in all modes of operation, those entities would be allowed up to 7 dealerships in Mississippi. And I would be happy to speak to my amendment.
Okay. You've heard the amendment. Are there any questions for Senator Fillingane?
Mr. Chairman, if I could speak to the amendment.
I will. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. So what I'm trying to do, in all honesty, is trying to acknowledge and address the needs that my friend Mr. Milstead has raised in protecting our existing dealerships across the state that are abiding by a set of rules that they've been required to abide by for many years. I think this amendment does no damage to that, because what I'm trying to accomplish with this amendment is to say that legacy dealerships cannot come in and do essentially cannibalization, as Senator Sparks says, and ignore their local dealers and sell directly to people around their local dealers. But you understand that those legacy dealerships and legacy manufacturers don't fit into this definition, because they manufacture fuel burning vehicles as well as the electric vehicles. So this amendment would only allow electric only manufacturers to set up dealerships up to 7 in the state of Mississippi for the purposes of selling their vehicles. And it would do no damage to the current dealerships that work under the rules of the legacy manufacturers. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Senator
Question on the
Fillingane, for
amendment.
the explanation. Senator Horn has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Fillingane, so your amendment would essentially strike out the August 21 of last year language where any electronic vehicle manufacturers could come in.
It
and
would.
have up to 7 dealerships.
It would, because it's so restrictive. It only allows the one using that language, because nobody else knew they should do that, because the legislature was to come in and impose these new rules on them. So I think it would be unfair to simply allow just the one Tesla dealership that's already been established. I mean, if we're going to change the rules of the road on them, then they ought to be allowed to do a few more, at least in the state, and to be able to get their product out. And I think you raised the question, there were a couple of other electric only manufacturers across the country, like Lucid and Rivian, maybe, that also would like to know if we're going to change the rules. So if they would like to set up some dealerships here to sell their product, they could do so as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sojourner, for a question.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Fillingane, to your amendment, I just want to make sure I'm clear. So your amendment would allow the manufacturer to open up to 7 dealerships within the state.
Yes, ma'am.
And it also still allows that manufacturer to go out and create franchises
Yes,
to
ma'am.
sell their vehicles.
Yes, ma'am.
Does your amendment speak, or your amendment doesn't speak to other electronic vehicle manufacturers being allowed to set up sales locations in the state?
It does, if they fit within the definition of a manufacturer who manufactures and sells only motor vehicles that are plug-in electric vehicles that do not rely on any non-electric source of power, I think that there are several manufacturers that fall into that definition along with Tesla.
Okay, so they could set up the manufacturing sales locations along with the franchise location.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator England, for a question.
Yeah, just a couple questions for Senator Fillingane. Does your amendment, does it still include the provision that this only applies to dealerships that have continuously been licensed since August 1st of 2021, or do we strike that out?
Strike that out.
Okay, all right. I thought you did. I just wanted to make sure. Now, the other question I have is, we're limiting it to 7. Is there any reason for that number, or are we just trying to?
You know, there's nothing super special about it other than in Sunday school, I was always taught that 7 is the perfect number in the scriptures. So
Well,
I think 7 is more than 1 and is less than 25. So I would, I like 7, but if you prefer a different number, I'm open to whatever.
I will not speak against something that you learned in Sunday school, Senator Fillingane.
Amen.
I think Senator England was going to talk about a crap table.
The Lord works in
table.
mysterious ways.
One thing, Senator Johnson and I were discussing, Senator Fillingane, what does this deal with golf carts, or does it exclude them?
I would not, no, I would not intend to deal with that.
Okay.
Only, no.
All right.
And if you would like to add some clarifying language, I'm happy to accept that. It's a
He said there's
conceptual
not need
amendment.
to. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
All right. Are there any other questions on the amendment? If not, you've heard the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? One more time. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? Ayes seem to have it. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. All right. So this bill does have a reverse repealer in it. I imagine there'll be some more work done on this. There are a lot of good questions. And I think for myself, I intend on having the Motor Commission and their council come over and discuss some of the definitions. I think, like you mentioned, Senator England, what is direct sales, what's internet sales, what's considered, what is allowable under a manufacturer's license, what's not allowable, what is allowable under a dealership license, and what is not allowable. I think there's some basic terms that we really need to get a fundamental grasp on while we're dealing with this. So anyway, are there any other questions or anyone wish to speak on the bill? Seeing none, is there a motion? Motion is title sufficient do pass as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. The bill will be reported out. Thank you, Marty. Next bill is House Bill 917, Home-Based Opportunity Freedom Act of 22. This bill came over from the House essentially in Section 2. It describes what home-based work means, any illegal occupation lawful under both federal and state law. You can read through Section 2B. And then Section 3 talks about what a local unit of government shall not adopt or enforce. And I believe there are a number of things that are in here that that describe what a municipality or a local unit of government cannot prohibit, excuse me. And you see a list of those, A through J. Section 4 talks about a person alleging a violation of this act may bring a civil action for appropriate relief, including reasonable attorney fees and witness fees and costs for the prevailing party. Section 5, the application of this act does not supersede any deed restriction, covenant, or agreement restricting the use of land or master deed by law or other document. This does have a reverse repealer in it. That is a description of the bill. Are there any questions, Senator Simmons, for a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was really concerned about how this bill affects home rule regarding our municipalities and also their ability that they have to determine the zoning in their particular areas. Like, I guess my concern, what my mayor in Greenville decides to do with these type of businesses may be different than what the city of Cleveland decides to do. So do we really, or have you heard anything from MML or your cities regarding how they feel about this bill?
I've had some concerns from MML, back to to the mayor of Greenville. Does he know what he's doing?
He knows he's doing.
Okay. I've had some concerns from people, and I've had some citizens call me and want to make sure. I think what COVID highlighted was that, people were forced to kind of go to their homes and work, and what I think the thrust of the bill, as this is the first year I think this bill's come before us. Maybe a little more work, but I think that what we want to make sure is that we're not preventing people from working from home. The impact is something that's a concern of people. What can be done, what can be placed in your backyard that may not be visible from the street. These are some of the concerns that some of you have brought up to me. So just want to make sure that, obviously there are some concerns, but there's some, I guess people are just trying to make sure that they have the opportunity to go into business. And I think a lot of businesses start out of people's dens and garages, and, the effort is to grow to where they actually have to go get a commercial space and grow into a bigger business. So we just want to make sure that, I think the thrust of the bill, what the author is trying to do, is to make sure that we don't circumvent that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Senator Boyd for a question.
Mr. Chairman, as I look at this bill, having been somebody who's worked out of their home, I definitely would like to make sure that those issues are protected. But there's a lot of holes in here that I feel like haven't been addressed.
Okay.
In particular, this has a reverse repealer. So although I like the idea of making sure people can work within their homes, I think there's one really overarching issue that we haven't looked at. How does it affect your neighbors? And this particular bill gives a lot of rights to the individual homeowners, but it doesn't look at how it protects their neighbor next door, the neighbor that bought those properties, assuming that there was certain zoning in place and those particular things. And by preempting the cities on this particular issue, I think we've got a lot of questions that need to be answered in a lot more detail than we have in this legislation right now. So, for instance, I'm going through my neighborhood. There's limited parking outside. So this doesn't limit how many people can come in for an appointment. Could my neighbor open up an aerobic studio next door and they're coming in for an appointment, but she could have 30 cars there. So there are things like that that really haven't been contemplated in these definitions that I hope that we will continue to look at. Another thing that's come up too is there's no limiting on safety. Well, if my neighbor opens up that aerobic studio and she's got 30 people in there, she might need some sprinklers. So there are things in here that we really need to look at safety wise and different things like that, although I will support going forward, I think that this needs a lot of work in committee. So I'll just kind of end on that particular note. And then also Section 4 does trouble me. This legislature through a number of years has limited provisions like this going into play, and I'm not sure really why it's needed here today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Boyd. Senator Barnett, I see your hand up over there, and we'll recognize you for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to have a motion at the proper time and also an opportunity, if I may now, to speak on that motion.
In just a minute, we have other questions on the bill.
Okay, well, can I ask a question?
Yeah, you can ask a question.
Okay. And this goes in line to what Senator Boyd said as well. And as a former mayor and looking at this bill, this basically will limit the powers of the municipalities, the mayor, the city council. It basically enables them to do nothing. For an example, if the city council and the mayor decided that they wanted to zone certain areas, whether it be commercial, residential, agriculture, any of those then this bill would do away with that. If there was an individual next door that wanted to open up a horse stable, really, the city couldn't do anything about it. So I agree that this bill needs not just a little work, but it needs a lot of work done on it, because we're basically taking away the authority of those individuals elected to make those decisions for those cities, towns, and villages. So, but again, at the proper time, I'd like to have a motion and also speak on my motion.
Senator Parker for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, I think I echo the same concerns that Senator Barnett has and that Senator Boyd raised a moment ago. I've got a pretty large garage in my backyard, and I always thought it'd be nice to have a Tesla dealership, and so this now has me pondering whether or not if both of these bills pass as we amended and that kind of thing, maybe you just open me a Tesla dealership in the backyard, and I'm sure my neighbors wouldn't be too concerned about that. But I just bring this to light here because it is deadline day. These are two very important bills. I didn't weigh in on the dealers bill, but I certainly have concerns to how we've discussed that and how we've edited it. And I certainly have maybe even more concerns about this bill, and I think it just owes to the fact that we maybe need to look at the provisions of this and, to your point from earlier, come up with something that does address the needs that we would like to see met, but doesn't create a loophole that is too wide. So I'll phrase that as a "wouldn't you agree" question.
Thank you. All right, Senator Sojourner for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, before my quick question, in my constant strive to try to find ways to help Mississippians make a living and engage in business without the overburdening bureaucracy of government, I think this bill does a wonderful job at spelling out ways that individuals can get creative and help make a living for themselves without having to adhere to the heavy hand of government. My question to you is this: I'm assuming, is this bill all speaking to new code section, or will this bill be applied to an existing code section? And if so, what is that code section?
Council has informed me these are all new code sections.
Okay, so it will not apply to an existing code section.
I don't think so. Council is informed me there's a code excuse me. I'll let counsel explain. He's an attorney.
Senator, I don't know if the effect is to apply, if the intent is to apply to an existing code section, but if there ends up being a conflict, for example, here in section 3.2D, local unit of government shall not prohibit or require structural modifications to the home or accessory structure. That may need to be made more clear that that's applying only in this context and not across the board.
It's clear as mud. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I graduated high school, and one of my teachers is sitting in the gallery. He knows I can read, and I think I know what the inevitable action here is. So Senator Simmons, I think you had a motion. You won't let Senator Barnett, whichever one of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My motion is to table, and I know I can speak to it. And I'm quite sure Senator Barnett and others may want to speak to it, but this is just one of those things where all of the questions and concerns are so great that this is something we should, I believe, should just look at after we leave here this time and come back and try to figure out a way, I guess, as Senator Sojourner said, to try to create opportunities for people, but certainly we don't want to get into the business of trying to tell our local units of government on what they should do regarding zoning and how they should regulate those areas that they were duly elected to represent. So that's to my motion.
Okay, are there any questions to the motion? Senator Bryan.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how this bill would work, and it seems to me that I could, under this bill, move my law office to my house and have a secretary and perhaps paralegals come work at my house and see clients at my house. But there's another bill on the calendar, as I understand it, would preclude me from asking any of my employee or requiring any of my employees or indeed any of my potential customers from getting a COVID vaccine. So I would not be able to prohibit these people who are unvaccinated from either working for me or coming at my house or coming into my house, which seems a strange way. I have certain freedom, very strange freedom that I have here in my house. But if I thought one of these unvaccinated people was coming into my house and likely to give me a disease from which I could potentially die, under the Castle Doctrine, could I shoot that person? And if it's an employee, not a customer, but an employee, if I did that, would workers' comp be the sole remedy?
Senator Bryan, your house is so big, you could probably hold closings and arbitration hearings at the same time, but
I think Senator Parker's garage is probably bigger than my garage. I'm just going to go out on a limb.
Senator Blunt, do you have a question on the motion?
Briefly speak in favor of the motion.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where I live, there are 3 hospitals very near my house, and hundreds of people work 24 hours a day there. And under the bill, as I read it, if my next door neighbor wanted to open up a 24-hour drug treatment facility and body shop, he could do it. And I just think that we've always said that the government that is closest to the people is the best and the least onerous and from a regulatory standpoint, and we had to trust those folks in those local communities to make those decisions. And for that reason, I support Senator Simmons' motion.
Senator Barnett, you're recognized. You want to speak on the motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
You're recognized.
Thank you. I think Senator Simmons stole my motion. Senator Blunt has said what I wanted to say. So I just want to move for adoption of the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sojourner, you want to speak on the?
But before we move on the motion, I'm assuming that Senator Simmons's move trumps mine, but I still want to ask the question, is there a reverse repealer in the bill?
Yes, there is.
Okay. Can I speak against the
Yes,
motion?
you're recognized.
Because no one has made that speech. I do. I understand some of the questions raised, and we do this every day. We put reverse repealers in bills to move them forward so we can continue to work on them. While I like the bill as it is, I certainly respect my colleagues' opinions on some of the work needing to be done. However, with a reverse repealer in the bill, I would ask the committee to please move the bill forward so we can continue to address those issues while we keep the bill alive at this moment. So I would ask you to vote against the amendment. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else wish to speak on the motion to table? Seeing none, if you're in favor of tabling the bill, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Ayes have it. Ayes have it. We'll move on to the next bill. All right, House Bill 918, Senator Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 918 would create an opportunity for restaurant owners that currently have a brick and mortar restaurant with an on-premise permit to apply for an additional permit at a cost of $100 per year to serve alcohol from a food truck. That food truck would have to be located in a GO-CUP district and abide by all the same proximity restrictions to churches and schools. And that's an explanation of what the bill does. We do have a strike call with a reverse repealer in it.
Are any questions?
Motion's title sufficient, do pass as amended.
All right, the motion is title sufficient, do pass as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Next is House Bill 1098. Senator Hill, you're recognized to explain your bill. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill came over from the House, from Representative Byrd, came through County Affairs, and basically it affects one area in the state where there is a rural fire department and a fire protection district. And those folks are being doubly charged in that one area. And what this bill does, it would not allow the fire protection district to levy a fee or a tax if there is an already existing volunteer fire department that the collection is being set forth by the Board of Supervisors. And that's basically all it does.
Okay. Are there any questions for Senator Hill? Seeing none, for a motion. All right, motion is title sufficient, do pass. All those as amended, all those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. That bill will be reported out. Next is House Bill 1162. Senator Johnson, you're recognized to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill adds 3 years to the tax credit for use of public ports and airports. And that's an explanation of the bill. I would like to make an amendment to add a reverse repealer in.
You've heard the amendment. Are there any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it.
A motion is title sufficient, do pass as amended.
Motion is title sufficient, do pass as amended. All those in favor say aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. That bill will be reported out. Next is Senate Bill or House Bill 1163. The definition is it's a revised definition of installation charges to exclude labor in connection with residential roofing. That's part of what this bill attempts to address, but this is a strike all that has a reverse repealer in it. There's some parts of this bill that I think are worthy of consideration. I think the tax part on the services, starting to mess with the tax on labor on roofing. It's a complicated issue, and I think we're going to try to take that portion out of this bill. But there are other portions in here that deal with, I think we've had concerns about contractors coming in from out of state that aren't charging sales tax that we tried to deal with in the past. And I think there's some lines in this bill that kind of go to addressing that. But there's also a problem with, you are allowed to build up to 2 houses a year without a residential license in the state. What some people are doing, contractors are attempting to do, is to say, I will build the house for you, but you pull the permit. Well, when you do so as an individual, you are the one responsible for everything. And I don't think a lot of people in this state understand that. And so what we're trying to do is to put some some liability on a construction manager that does that. So instead of him just saying, I'm gonna build your house for you, and then he gets done and a year and a half later you have problems and he's gone, he or she is gone and you're left there holding the bag. People don't realize that. And I think there's some level of liability that should be had by construction managers that do that type of work. So there are some worthy things in here. It also talks about, trying to make sure people are licensed that do any kind of work, life skill work that your house could potentially blow up electrical, gas, mechanical, plumbing, those type things, that they are licensed through the state. And we want to at least continue those conversations. And so we do have a reverse repealer in this bill to keep it alive, to kind of work on the bill some more and have a final product later to present to you for an up or down vote, if that's what the body wishes to do. So if there are no questions, I'd move for a motion. Motion is title sufficient to do pass as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? Ayes have it. Next bill is House Bill 1164. Senator Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the same bill that we passed out. What we've done is taken the House bill, did a strike all for the MDA Small Business Initiative Program. We had some debate in here about that, and we just made this language to match what we had passed out of the Senate. And that's an explanation of the bill.
Any questions? Senator Horn.
For an amendment at the proper time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Senator Horn for his amendment? Senator Horn, you're recognized for an amendment.
I'd like to amend lines 25 and 26 and strike the words he or she and insert in lieu of they, in case the executive director of Mississippi Development Authority identifies as non-binary. It's a joke, Mr. Chairman. I withdraw my amendment. I was just joking.
All right. Are there any other questions?
Motion.
Motion.
Title sufficient do pass as amended.
Title sufficient do pass as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, the ayes have it. That bill will be reported out. Last bill is House Bill 1523. Senator McMahon, you're recognized to explain the bill.
This is a local and private bill from the House of Representatives. It's basically the exact same thing that we pass when we do other local options for other municipalities. It's double referred because it would be a new potential tax if the people voted for it. It's our standard language except for one exception. This is not a special referendum. It will have to be on a general ballot. So on a general election. If there aren't any questions, I move for passage.
Any questions on the bill? Seeing none, the motion was title sufficient do pass. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, the ayes have it. Motion to rise and report. So moved.